I call on the General Secretary to to talk to the annual report. We'll get this right eventually. Thank you.
Thank you very much. President, Conference, Dave Penman, General Secretary, moving the annual report. Conference, after we met here in this room 12 months ago, that very evening, the Government announced their plans to cut 91,000 jobs from the civil service. A figure plucked from the air, based on a point in time, pre-Brexit, of course, when apparently the civil service had just the right number of staff. Rishi Sunak was Chancellor at that time, custodian of the public finances, and we are told one of 3 cabinet ministers who, along with Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, presented that plan to Cabinet earlier on the week as their big idea for demonstrating they were serious about getting the public finances in order. That proposal was so intellectually flawed and so transparently incomprehensible as a strategy for good government that it was never going to survive the first contact with reality. But then, that was never really the point, was it? It was just another announcement from a government flailing around, making promises that it didn't even know how to keep. A government of tactical announcements rather than strategic purpose. The civil service was just a convenient tool that it could promise to cut to the bone because, let's face it, who cares about the civil service? 91,000 job cuts to be announced on the front page of their favourite tabloid until word leaked out and it spoiled the party. Don't know how that happened. Not a thought for the millions of citizens who rely on those public services, or the hundreds of thousands of civil servants who woke up that morning not knowing what this meant for their jobs, their careers and their families. Civil service leaders were left to apologise to staff for the manner of that announcement and unable to explain how it could be delivered. It would have been funny if it wasn't so serious, as we watched bemused ministers try to pretend this was some sort of elaborate, complex plan. With every interview, it became clear that it so obviously wasn't, and I don't think even they believed it. But again, that didn't matter. The civil service had served its purpose. The years of undermining, politicisation and insulting behaviour from ministers was paying off. This pantomime villain that they had spent years creating was a lazy, woke, Remainer elite. They only wanted to work from home, to have a long weekend and eat cheese from the fridge, according to the Prime Minister. Why then would it matter if you cut it by a fifth? Johnson went a few months after that as the scandals mounted and it became all too much even for his most loyal supporters. Then, during the leadership election that followed, Liz Truss demonstrated that her team couldn't even cut and paste properly from a Taxpayers Alliance pamphlet, and that she couldn't count. Should have been a sign, really. She promised £11 billion of savings by transferring 20,000 civil servants out of London, and then blamed us for deliberately misinterpreting those alternative facts. A few unfounded accusations of anti-Semitism against the civil service later, and the sacking of a permanent secretary for future crimes, as yet undefined, and she was gone. It was the merest glimmer of insight into how she would have valued the civil service. But I think we got the picture just before the New World Order got it in his way of Trussonomics. Our current Prime Minister entered Downing Street promising a government of accountability and integrity. I don't know if our Prime Minister actually meant those words, or the chat bot that appears to write, and let's face it, sometimes deliver, his speeches, just churned it out as he sought to put clear blue water between him and the chaos and moral vacuum of the previous administrations. Either way, from day one, that sentiment came unstuck as he faced his own realities. What to do about a close political ally? Your unsuccessful campaign manager in the previous leadership election? Tricky one, that. We now know there were written complaints of bullying submitted about Dominic Raab whilst he was Justice Secretary under Johnson. And we also know, because the Prime Minister refused on 5 separate occasions to answer a direct question about it, that this new Prime Minister was aware about those concerns as well. Faced with those concerns from civil servants, what did he do? Not only did he appoint Raab as the Deputy Prime Minister of this country, but he reappointed him to the very department where those concerns had been raised. What exactly does that tell you about this Prime Minister and how he values civil servants? It took Raab to ask for an investigation. He was confident he would be cleared, as the Prime Minister was apparently happy just to sit all of this out. Then, when the report made clear that Raab was a bully, the Prime Minister dithered, allowed him to resign rather than sack him, and offered him the opportunity to dismiss the report and its conclusions, name one of his accusers, and undermine the entire process. All this, where the government said not a word. Raab's 2,000-word essay in the Telegraph actually spoke with greater clarity of his character than even Tolley's report. Belligerent and unapologetic. For 2 hours there was complete silence from government, giving Raab the space to try and redeem his reputation that was about to take a hammering when the report finally dropped. The final act of a Prime Minister desperate to repay political favours. Meanwhile, the victims of Raab's bullying were left to sit at home or the very offices they shared with him, watching all of this unfold in the news channels. They were apparently not even deserving of a letter to explain what was happening. A government of integrity and accountability. Well, Prime Minister, if you want to know what integrity looks like, maybe spend a moment, as I did, with those civil servants who took the most extraordinarily brave decision to complain about the bullying conduct of the Deputy Prime Minister, one of the most powerful people in the country. They took that decision not knowing if it would be career-ending. They took that decision in the hope that if they did, other civil servants might be spared what they'd gone through. They took that decision knowing that Prime Ministers in the past have sought to side with their political allies rather than the civil servants who have been bullied. Prime Minister, that is what integrity and accountability looks like. Conference, I want to take a moment to pay tribute to those civil servants. No one can fully imagine what that experience has been like and how the entire system is designed to protect the Prime Minister and not those at the receiving end of an abuse of power. And I also want to take head on the accusations that have been laid at our door by the bully Dominic Raab. The FDA has no hit list of ministers. The FDA does not go around encouraging complaints. But the FDA has, and it always will, stand up to bullies on behalf of its members. As Tolley made clear in his report, Mr. Raab, maybe if you spent a bit more time looking in the mirror and a bit less time looking for reds under the bed, perhaps you wouldn't be in the place you are now. Raab may be gone, but it's hardly a vindication of a system that so patently fails the very people it's supposed to protect. It was a system that the Prime Minister inherited, but he didn't have to keep. When it comes to regulating the conduct of ministers, Rishi Sunak believes that the moral giant that is Boris Johnson had got it just about right. When he finally appointed a new ethics advisor, he, like Johnson, decided to ignore the recommendations of the Committee for Standards in Public Life, who had recommended an independent process underpinned by statute. Instead, he, like Johnson before him, prioritised political control and retained a system where he gets to veto any investigation in the first place and where he's judge and jury on the outcome. Is it any wonder that when we polled our senior civil service members, the ones who most regularly come into contact with ministers, 70% said they had no confidence in the system for raising a complaint. 1 in 6 reported misconduct from ministers in the last 12 months alone, across more than 20 government departments. Demonstrating clearly, RAB cannot be dismissed as a bad apple. Now, not all FDA members work with ministers. Indeed, it's only a small minority of them. But all FDA members have faced the consequences of the worst cost of living squeeze in a generation. Inflation has been running at over 10% for nearly a year, and no public servant has been isolated from the consequences of that. We have, as you rightly expect of us, sought to influence government and employers to address this crisis. We've engaged with ministers and their officials, pushed for business cases to exploit what opportunities there are, and submitted independent evidence alongside Prospect, countering the government's myth that public service pay rises are a cause of inflation. In the fast stream, where pay stagnation has had a crippling effect on the attrition rate in the scheme, our members voted to take industrial action. No one could have been failed to be impressed by the commitment, innovation and energy shown by our fast stream committee in delivering the results. Where are you? Can you stand up, please? Because I think all of FDA should applaud them. You better not get a bigger applause than me. That vote has led to negotiations which we hope will deliver long-term pay reform. Good for FDA members, good for the future of the civil service, and good for the taxpayer as attrition rates fall. In the senior civil service, we've been promised pay reform and competency-based pay progression for nearly half a decade. Ministers complain about the turnover of senior staff, but refuse to pay for a system that would address the reasons why people are incentivised to move from job to job. Whilst government was hiding behind peer review bodies during the winter of discontent, they failed to mention, of course, that there was one review body that they refused to implement in full. Who could have guessed that that would be the one that dealt with their own senior civil servants? Over the winter and into the spring, we met with the Minister for the Cabinet Office, Jeremy Quinn, and his officials. As the government played hokey-cokey with negotiations across all of the public sector, we thought actually there was a chance of progress. Quinn was actually more engaged than many of his predecessors. He promised us enhanced dialogue, and he wanted to ensure that the civil service didn't lose out by agreeing a framework for pay early, as it had done in 2022, where it had the lowest pay outcome of anywhere in the public sector. Everyone knew the government's priority was the NHS, and that if this could be settled, it would set the template for negotiations elsewhere. And sure enough, it did. A similarly structured offer was put in education, with a pay rise for 2023 and a non-pensionable cost of living additional payment. That, of course, is where it all started to go wrong. Have been assured that the pay remit document was oven ready, someone appeared to forget to tell the head chef. Silence, frustration, explanations, but no meaningful meetings of substance, and crucially, no offer. Then, over a period of 24 hours, with no warning, we were told that it was being imposed and would not contain the additional cost of living compensation that's applied across the rest of the public sector. Why the U-turn? Why once again treat the civil service as a second-class public sector workers? What of the promises of enhanced engagement in ensuring that the service didn't lose out as it had in 2022? The rug had clearly been pulled from under the feet of the civil service leadership, both political and official. Whoever made the decision to treat the civil service so blatantly different from elsewhere, they were not concerned about the impact, and I doubt, to be honest, whether they even cared. It was a decision to send a message elsewhere. A government that had shown time and again that it didn't know how to negotiate with the unions was having wobbles over the votes in health and education. Send a message that we can play hardball. That's what the civil service is good for. Who cares what impact it has? The civil service was once again being handed around government as a convenient tool to make whatever point was deemed more important. We pleaded with the Minister not to make this mistake, not to treat the civil service in the way he insisted he was trying to avoid. We didn't get an answer then, and we haven't had an answer since, as to why this government has decided that civil servants are so transparently worth less than the rest of the public sector. Why don't they value their own employees equally with those in health and education? We could rehearse arguments all day that those other sectors cannot operate without the support of the civil service. But then this is not a rational argument. Someone somewhere in Number 10 or the Cabinet Office decided this would help. Well, at least the handling of these disputes has been consistent. And so, while some in health is settled, disputes are continuing, most notably with junior doctors. They're no nearer resolution in education, and they now have a growing dispute in the civil service. I was clear with the Minister that Friday that if he chose to treat FDA members so contemptuously, then we would have to respond. How does this government of Rishi Sunak demonstrate that it values its own employees? It may not be pursuing 91,000 job cuts, but withdrawing an idiotic, undeliverable policy is not, in my book, handing out favours. Workloads are increasing and resources are frozen as inflation delivers real-term cuts to budgets. Now, having been told that you're lazy, woke, inefficient, Remainer, activist, snowflake, you're also now apparently a Machiavellian genius, able to unseat ministers and undermine the settled will of government. I don't know about you, Conference, but I've had enough of this. At some point, we have to say enough is enough. Ministers need to demonstrate they value civil servants. It is they who have put a number on that. It is they who believe that the cost of living crisis should be addressed for some public servants and not others. And it is they who have pushed the FDA over the edge into balloting for industrial action. The first time in over 40 years that the FDA has balloted nationally for industrial action on pay. Now, I know what an extraordinarily difficult choice that is going to be for members. I know you value the vital public services that you're so passionate about delivering. And I can assure you, Conference, that I and the Executive Committee would not ask this of you unless we thought it was absolutely necessary. There comes a time for everyone when enough is enough, when the only response can be a demonstrable one that signals to ministers exactly how strongly you feel. That time is now, Conference. Thank you.